hubris kills empires faster than any dreadnought. Commander Victor thought subjugating the Aegis mining colony was a mere footnote in his brilliant military career. He handed humans the keys to his planetary refineries, expecting broken slaves. 3 days later, he watched his entire armada burn from the inside out. Commander Victor stood on the obsidian observation deck of the Directorate flagship, gazing down at the terrestrial sphere of Aegis Prime. The subjugation of the human colony had taken exactly 2 hours and 14 minutes. It was almost insulting. Victor, a decorated veteran of the Directorate's expansion campaigns, had prepared for a grueling siege. He had authorized orbital bombardments, deployed mechanized infantry, and readied his medical bays for mass casualties. Instead, the humans had simply powered down their planetary defense grids and broadcasted an unconditional surrender before the first Directorate drop pods even breached the exosphere. "Cowards," Security Chief Gareth sneered, his heavy boots echoing on the metallic floor as he approached the command console. "Intelligence warned us that the human species was unpredictable, prone to irrational martyrdom. Yet they roll over at the first shadow of our fleet." Victor narrowed his eyes, adjusting the cuffs of his immaculate dark uniform. "Survival instinct is a universal language, Gareth. They looked at our plasma batteries and ran the mathematics. They chose life as laborers over death as heroes. It makes our job exponentially easier." The Directorate did not exterminate. They absorbed. Their empire ran on raw materials and the sweat of conquered species. The humans of Aegis Prime, a population of roughly 40,000 engineers, miners, and terraformers, were immediately processed and shipped off-world. Their destination was Tartarus 9, a volcanic, hostile moon dedicated to refining hypertritium, the volatile fuel that powered the Directorate's faster-than-light drives. Within 12 hours of the surrender, the human workforce was fitted with neural dampening collars, heavy biomechanical rings locked around their necks. The collars were designed to suppress aggressive neurological spikes, monitor biometric output, and, if necessary, detonate via remote command. Standing in the staging yards of Tartarus 9, Nathaniel Reed felt the cold metal of the collar press against his carotid artery. Nathaniel was the chief foreman of Aegis Prime, a man whose broad shoulders and calloused hands spoke of a lifetime of grueling physical labor. Beside him stood Chloe Simmons, the colony's lead systems architect, her sharp eyes scanning the monolithic, brutalist architecture of the Directorate refinery. "Keep your heart rate steady, Chloe," Nathaniel whispered, barely moving his lips. The roaring exhaust of the atmospheric scrubbers drowned out his voice to anyone standing more than a foot away, but the collars monitored vitals. Panic could trigger a pacification shock. "I'm fine, Nate," Chloe replied, her gaze fixed on the glowing blue conduits running along the refinery's vaulted ceilings. "Look at their energy grid. It's archaic, high yield, but entirely unshielded from localized feedback loops. They rely purely on brute force." "Just focus on the plan," Nathaniel muttered, stepping forward as a line of heavily armored Directorate guards shoved them toward the processing vats. "We have 72 hours before the fleet refuels and leaves orbit. We need to be inside their network by tomorrow." Day 1 of the enslavement began with brutal efficiency. The humans were thrust into the lower levels of the refinery, an infernal labyrinth of extreme heat, toxic fumes, and deafening machinery. Their task was to manually calibrate the magnetic containment fields of the raw hypertritium, a job the Directorate considered too hazardous for their own personnel. Victor watched the camera feeds from his pristine orbital command center, sipping a glass of synthesized wine. He expected a high mortality rate. He expected weeping, collapse, and despair. What he saw instead was deeply unsettling in its mundanity. The humans organized themselves with terrifying speed. Without needing to be whipped or shouted at, Nathaniel Reed took charge, orchestrating his people into specialized shifts. They didn't fight the machinery. They adapted to it. By the 8th hour, a team led by Chloe Simmons had dismantled a malfunctioning plasma drill, ostensibly to repair it. "What are they doing in Sector 4? Victor asked Twart, tapping a polished finger against his command throne. Chief Gareth zoomed in on the feed. On the screen, Chloe was elbow-deep in the drill's casing, her hands moving with practiced, methodical precision. "Repairing the containment housing, Commander. The previous alien workforce damaged it 3 cycles ago." "And they figured out our technology in 8 hours?" Victor asked, a flicker of genuine surprise breaking his stoic facade. "They are a highly mechanical species, sir. Crude, but resourceful. Their efficiency is actually a benefit. We are already running at 90% of our daily quota, and the shift isn't even over." Victor watched Nathaniel Reed walk through the toxic ash of the refinery floor, patting a young human on the back, offering a canteen of water, pointing out structural weaknesses in the rock face. The foreman looked entirely defeated, a broken man making the best of a living hell. Victor smiled, satisfied. "Increase the quotas by 20% for tomorrow. Let us see how resourceful they truly are when their backs are against the wall." Down in the suffocating heat of Sector 4, Chloe wiped a mixture of sweat and industrial grease from her forehead. She slid the heavy casing back over the plasma drill and engaged the locking mechanisms. "It's done," she whispered to Nathaniel, who was pretending to inspect the drill bit. "Did you bypass the governor?" Nathaniel asked. "Better," Chloe smirked, her eyes gleaming in the dim red emergency lighting. "I didn't just bypass the mechanical governor. I tapped the drill's power cell directly into the frequency of our neural dampening collars. The Directorate thinks these collars are just monitors. They don't realize they are two-way transmitters. Every human neck in this facility is now a wireless routing node. We have a localized biological mesh network, and it's completely invisible to their security scanners." Nathaniel nodded slowly, his face devoid of emotion to satisfy the overhead cameras. "Good. Phase 1 is complete. Tomorrow, we start feeding them ghosts." Day 2 dawned with a suffocating blanket of sulphurous clouds pressing down on the glass domes of Tartarus 9. Inside the Directorate Command Center, Overseer Dominic, Victor's direct superior from the core worlds, was projecting a holographic transmission into Victor's office. "The reports from your sector are highly unusual, Victor," Dominic said, his aristocratic features cast in sharp blue light. "Your hypertritium yields have not just met the new 20% increase, they have exceeded the baseline by 400%. Are these numbers fabricated?" "Absolutely not, Overseer," Victor replied, standing rigidly at attention. "The human workforce is highly motivated. They possess an obsessive-compulsive need to optimize their environment. They have streamlined the refinement cooling process using rudimentary thermodynamic principles our own engineers overlooked." Dominic's holographic eyes narrowed. "Do not praise the slaves, Commander. Just ensure the fleet is fully fueled by tomorrow evening. The Ascendancy requires your armada at the front lines." "It will be done, Overseer." As the transmission cut out, Gareth stormed into the office, a security datapad gripped tightly in his gauntleted hand. He looked agitated. "Commander," Gareth said, his voice tight. "We have a problem. Or at least I think we have a problem." Victor sighed, irritated by the interruption. "Speak, Gareth. Is it the humans? Have they rioted?" No, sir. They are working harder than ever. But our central telemetry is registering micro-fluctuations in the energy grid. It's barely perceptible, a drop of 1,000th of a volt every few seconds across the network. Machinery degradation, Victor dismissed, waving a hand. They are pushing the drills to 400% capacity. Of course, there will be power fluctuations. That was my initial thought, Gareth pressed, stepping closer to the desk. But the fluctuations are rhythmic. They form a mathematical sequence. Prime numbers, Commander. The power grid is stuttering in prime numbers. Victor's blood ran cold for a fraction of a second. He pulled the datapad from Gareth's hand and stared at the telemetry logs. The data was undeniable. The energy spikes weren't random. They were deliberate pulses. "Bring me the human foreman," Victor ordered, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Now." 10 minutes later, Nathaniel Reed was thrown violently into Victor's pristine office. The human hit the polished floor hard, his heavy boots skidding. He smelled of sulfur, sweat, and ozone. His hands were bound in magnetic cuffs, and the neural dampening collar flashed a warning red. Victor circled his desk, looking down at the kneeling human, like an entomologist studying a particularly repulsive insect. "Foreman Reed," Victor said smoothly. "You have been very compliant, very helpful. Your people have shattered our production quotas." "We just want to survive, Commander," Nathaniel said, his voice trembling slightly. He kept his eyes locked on the floor, the perfect picture of a terrified, broken slave. "You promised that if we worked, our families on Aegis Prime would be spared. We are just trying to prove our worth to the Directorate." Victor crouched down, suddenly grabbing Nathaniel by the hair and forcing his head up. "Then explain to me why my security chief believes your people are using our industrial equipment to broadcast an encrypted signal through my energy grid." Nathaniel's breath hitched. Sweat beaded on his temples. His heart rate, monitored by the collar, spiked dramatically. I don't know what you're talking about." "Signal. Commander, we are miners. We diverted auxiliary power from the cooling vents to supercharge the magnetic containment fields. It causes slight power draws. We had to do it to meet the 400% yield you demanded." "Do not lie to me," Victor roared, his composure shattering. He pressed a button on his wrist console, sending a sharp, agonizing electrical shock directly into Nathaniel's collar. Nathaniel screamed, his body seizing violently as he collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air. "Are you building a bomb, human?" Victor hissed, standing over him. "Are you attempting to sabotage the refinery?" "No," Nathaniel coughed, spitting a mixture of saliva and blood onto the pristine floor. "Check the containment logs. Check the cooling vents. If we didn't divert the power, the hypertritium would have melted through the crust. We saved your refinery, and you're torturing me for it." Victor glared at Gareth, who was hurriedly tapping at a console near the wall. "Commander," Gareth hesitated. "The human... he's telling the truth. I am looking at the thermal logs for Sector 4. The core temperature was rising to critical levels 3 hours ago. A manual power diversion was initiated. It matches the fluctuations exactly." Victor stared at the bloody, trembling human on the floor. For a moment, paranoia battled with his inherent arrogance. The human looked so pathetic, so entirely outmatched. The idea that this sweating, dirty creature could outsmart the Directorate's sophisticated security grid was laughable. Victor smoothed his uniform, regaining his composure. "It seems I owe you an apology, Foreman Reed. Your crude engineering has saved Directorate property. But let this be a lesson. Do not alter our systems without my direct authorization." "Understood, Commander," Nathaniel wheezed, struggling to his knees. "It won't happen again." As Gareth dragged Nathaniel out of the office, Victor turned his attention back to the massive window overlooking the refinery. He felt a twinge of unease, but he pushed it down. Tomorrow, the fleet would be fueled, and he would leave this miserable moon behind. What Victor didn't know, what he couldn't possibly fathom, was that Nathaniel Reed's terror had been a masterful performance. Deep in the subterranean depths of Sector 4, Chloe Simmons sat hidden behind a massive hypertritium storage tank. She held a makeshift terminal, cobbled together from drill parts and alien biometric scanners. The screen cast a pale green glow over her face. She watched the telemetry data stream in. Nathaniel's capture and subsequent torture had been the linchpin of their operation. When Victor had triggered the pacification shock on Nathaniel's collar inside the command office, he had inadvertently authorized a priority override biological signal. Because Chloe had daisy-chained every human collar together into a localized mesh network, that administrative shock had been the key she needed. The Directorate's own security protocol, designed to punish a slave, had just authenticated Chloe's terminal with commander-level access to the flagship's mainframe. "He took the hit," Chloe whispered, her fingers flying across the crude keyboard. The prime number power fluctuations hadn't been a signal at all. They had been a brute force decryption attack, masking Chloe's intrusion into the orbital fleet's navigation and weapons systems. A green light pulsed on her screen. Access granted. Fleet command synchronized. Chloe smiled, a cold, predatory expression that would have terrified Commander Victor had he seen it. The humans hadn't surrendered Aegis Prime because they were cowards. They surrendered because they needed to get inside the Directorate's impenetrable defensive line. They needed access to the hypertritium. They needed access to the ships. "Day 2 is over," Chloe murmured to herself, initiating the sleeper protocol that would lock the alien fleet's life support systems. "Rest up, Victor. Tomorrow, we burn your empire to the ground." Morning on Tartarus 9 brought a suffocating heat that baked the industrial smog into a thick, mustard-colored haze. Inside the pristine, climate-controlled sanctuary of the Directorate flagship's bridge, Commander Victor Cross watched the massive orbital tethers detach from the planetary refinery below. The hypertritium transfer was complete. His armada was fully loaded, their massive, faster-than-light drives thrumming with raw, volatile power, ready to propel the fleet back to the front lines of the Ascendancy's war. Victor checked his chronometer and allowed himself a rare, self-satisfied smile. 72 hours. In exactly 3 days, he had conquered a human colony, relocated their entire working population, shattered his production quotas, and fully refueled his armada. It was a masterclass in military efficiency. He was already drafting the report to Overseer Dominic in his head, anticipating the commendations and the inevitable promotion to Fleet Admiral. "All support umbilicals retracted, Commander," Security Chief Gareth Hayes announced from the tactical station, his voice crisp. "The refinery is switching back to automated holding patterns. The human laborers are being herded back into the containment barracks for their rest cycle." "Excellent," Victor said, clasping his hands behind his back. "Leave a minimal garrison on the surface to maintain order. The humans have proven themselves docile, but I want snipers positioned on the guard towers just in case. Initiate pre-flight ignition sequences across the fleet. We jump to slipspace in 20 minutes. Down on the toxic, ash-covered floor of Sector 4, Nathaniel Reed was not heading to the containment barracks. He leaned heavily against a rusted blast door, his ribs screaming in agony from the brutal electroshock torture Victor had inflicted upon him the previous afternoon. The metallic tang of blood still coated his teeth, but his mind was razor-sharp, counting down the seconds with cold precision. Beside him, cloaked in the shadows of a massive coolant pipe, Chloe Simmons knelt on the grated floor, furiously typing on a cobbled-together terminal built from scavenged bioscanner parts and drill casings. "They're detaching the fuel lines," Nathaniel whispered, his eyes scanning the catwalks above for Directorate patrols. "Victor is getting ready to run." "Let him try," Chloe muttered, her fingers dancing across the crude, glowing keys. The beauty of Directorate arrogance is that they never look closely at the things they consider beneath them. They assume their digital networks are impenetrable because they use closed-loop architecture, but they didn't factor in the physical fuel. "Is the payload in the reactors?" Nathaniel asked. "Confirmed," Chloe said, a vicious grin breaking through the grime on her face. Over the last 48 hours, the humans hadn't just been mining hypertritium, they had been weaponizing it. Using the priority override access Victor had unwittingly granted them during Nathaniel's torture, Chloe had embedded a complex magnetic cipher into the fuel refinement process. The physical isotopes of the hypertritium pumped up to the alien warships had been polarized, their atomic structures subtly altered to carry a physical code. As the fuel entered the warship's main FTL reactors, the intense heat and pressure triggered the cipher. The fuel itself was broadcasting a microscopic, localized electromagnetic pulse from inside the ship's impenetrable digital vaults. It was a Trojan horse delivered at the atomic level. "I am reading the magnetic signatures blooming inside their engine cores now," Chloe whispered, her terminal screen flashing with cascading lines of green data. "The cipher is unpacking. We are embedded in their central nervous system. Give the word, Nate." Nathaniel looked around the sprawling, infernal refinery. Thousands of human engineers, miners, and terraformers were walking slowly toward the barracks, their heads bowed, playing the role of defeated slaves to perfection. But their eyes were darting toward Nathaniel's position, waiting for the signal. They still wore the neural dampening collars, the heavy biomechanical rings blinking with red warning lights. Nathaniel touched his own collar. He remembered the blinding pain, the humiliation of kneeling before Victor. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the sulphurous air of Tartarus 9. "Burn them down," Nathaniel ordered. Chloe hit the execution key. Aboard the Directorate flagship, the transition from absolute control to absolute chaos took less than 4 seconds. Victor was in the middle of taking a sip of synthesized wine when the bridge's artificial gravity suddenly inverted, slammed back to normal, and then shut off completely. Victor crashed to the deck, his wine glass shattering against the bulkhead. Red emergency strobe lights bathed the command center in a hellish glare, accompanied by the deafening shriek of a dozen collision alarms. "Report!" Victor roared, scrambling to his feet and grabbing the edge of the command table to anchor himself. "Sir, we've lost helm control," Gareth shouted, his hands flying uselessly across his darkened console. "Mainframe is locking us out. It's not just us. The entire fleet is broadcasting distress signals. FTL drives are spooling up, but the navigation coordinates are scrambling. Shut down the reactors. Manually override the ignition sequence," Victor commanded, panic finally cracking his aristocratic facade. "I can't," Gareth yelled back, his eyes wide with terror as he stared at the main tactical holoscreen. "The internal security protocols have been rewritten. The ship thinks we are the hostile boarding party. Life support is venting atmosphere on decks 4 through 9. The automated defense turrets inside the ship they are targeting our own crew." "Who is doing this?" Victor demanded, slamming his fist onto the unyielding console. Is it an Ascendancy strike force? Where are they? It's not an external attack, Commander, Gareth whispered, his voice hollow. He pulled up a deeply buried telemetry log that was rapidly overwriting itself. The malicious code. It's coming from the engine room. It's coming from the hyper-tritium fuel itself. And the encryption key. It's registered to your administrative biosignature. Victor froze, the blood draining from his face. The memory of the sweating, bleeding human foreman, kneeling on his office floor, hit him like a physical blow. Check the containment logs, the human had begged. It hadn't been a plea for mercy. It had been a distraction. Before Victor could issue another order, the tactical screen shifted. The image of the fleet was replaced by a live video feed from the surface of Tartarus 9. Nathaniel Reed filled the screen. The grime and blood were still on his face, but the posture of the broken slave was gone. He stood tall, his eyes burning with an intensity that made Victor instinctively take a step back. Around Nathaniel's neck, the neural dampening collar beeped once, flashed from red to a steady, calm blue, and then popped open with a sharp mechanical hiss. It clattered to the grated floor. Across the entire refinery, 40,000 heavy metal collars disengaged simultaneously, raining down like a hailstorm of discarded iron. "Commander Victor Cross," Nathaniel said, his voice echoing through the comms of every ship in the Directorate Armada. "You came to our home. You threatened our families. You put chains around our necks and called us animals. You thought you could harness our labor because you consider yourselves gods." On the surface, the human workforce exploded into motion. This was not a mindless riot. It was a highly coordinated military strike. Mining lasers, modified by Chloe's engineering teams to bypass safety regulators, sliced through the heavy armor of the Directorate garrison guards in seconds. Stun batons were reversed engineered into localized EMP grenades, disabling the alien mechanized suits. The heavily outnumbered and entirely surprised alien guards were overrun in minutes. "You failed to understand one fundamental truth about humanity," Nathaniel continued, his voice steady over the screams of the dying Directorate soldiers echoing in the background. "We are builders. We take broken systems, and we re-engineer them to suit our needs. Your empire is just another broken system, and we just fixed it." "You arrogant insect!" Victor screamed at the screen, drawing his plasma sidearm and aiming it uselessly at the monitor. "I will glass that refinery. I will burn your entire species to ash. Tactical, fire all orbital bombardment cannons. Target Sector 4. "Sir, the cannons won't respond," Gareth cried out. "Wait. The dreadnoughts on our port flank. Their weapons arrays are coming online, but they aren't aiming at the surface, Commander." Victor looked out the massive obsidian observation window. Outside in the void of space, the heavy plasma cannons of 3 Directorate dreadnoughts were rotating, the massive barrels locked onto the flagship. "They're aiming at us," Victor whispered, dropping his sidearm. "I've locked your fleet's navigation systems into a localized gravity well, Victor." Chloe Simmons' voice chimed over the comms, cold and analytical. "And I've linked your warship's targeting computers to their own engine thermal exhausts. Your ships think they are surrounded by enemy targets. In about 30 seconds, your own armada is going to blow itself out of the sky." "No," Victor breathed, realizing the inescapable finality of the trap. They hadn't just disabled the fleet. They had turned the Directorate's overwhelming firepower into a circular firing squad. "This is Foreman Nathaniel Reed of the independent colony of Aegis Prime." Nathaniel's voice returned, carrying a harsh, unyielding authority. "To the Directorate forces currently trapped in orbit, you have 20 seconds to abandon ship and launch your escape pods toward the surface. If you surrender, you will be processed and put to work in the refineries. We have a lot of rebuilding to do, and we have a very strict quota to meet." Victor stood paralyzed as the escape pod alarms began shrieking throughout his ship. His crew, the elite soldiers of the Directorate, were fleeing, abandoning their posts in a desperate bid for survival. He looked down at the terrestrial sphere of Aegis Prime, then at the hellish, smog-choked rock of Tartarus 9. 3 days ago, he had been a conqueror. Now, he was a prisoner, outsmarted by engineers and miners who had used his own hubris as the ultimate weapon. Outside the viewport, the dreadnoughts fired. Brilliant lances of superheated plasma tore through the void, silently slicing into the flagship's hull. Down in the control room of Sector 4, Nathaniel and Chloe watched the orbital feeds as the sky above Tartarus 9 lit up with the brilliant, artificial stars of exploding warships. The Directorate fleet, the terror of the quadrant, was eating itself alive in a spectacular display of fire and shattered metal. Chloe slumped back against the console, wiping a streak of grease from her cheek. "Well," she breathed, a tired smile spreading across her face. "That takes care of the night shift. What's next on the agenda, Foreman?" Nathaniel looked up at the burning sky, a profound sense of satisfaction settling deep into his bruised bones. "Next, Chloe, we take their surviving supply ships. We go back to Aegis Prime, and we prepare for the Directorate's retaliation." He kicked the broken neural dampening collar across the floor, the metal skittering away into the shadows. "Because when they come back, we're going to show them exactly what human engineering looks like on a galactic scale." So did you love this epic sci-fi tale of human resilience and brilliant engineering? If you want to see more stories where humanity proves we are the most dangerous species in the galaxy, please hit that like button. Don't forget to share this video with your fellow sci-fi fans and subscribe to the channel for weekly, high-stakes HFY audio dramas. Ring the notification bell so you never miss a rebellion. Leave a comment below on what human trait you think aliens underestimate the most.